Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I'm your host, Damon Pistolka, and I am really excited for our guest today. Today, I've got Harry Moser with the Reshoring Initiative. Welcome, Harry.
I bet you say that about all the boys, Damon, but it's great to be here.
But man, I am excited because you talk about something that I think is a cool topic that people are really, I think, paying a little more attention to recently than they have in the past, or at least I hope they are. So, Harry, you are the founder of the Reshoring Initiative, trying to move manufacturing work back into the United States. I'll briefly talk about that, but let's talk about your background first before we get in there, because we'll talk about the Reshoring Initiative and how you got in that. But tell us about how you got into manufacturing and a little bit more about that.
So, grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey. The biggest thing in town was Singer sewing machine. And my grandfather was a foreman there. My dad ran about a third of the factory. The factory in its day was the biggest factory in the world.
Wow.
5,000 workers, 2.5 million square feet. This is 1900 kind of time. And I worked there summers in high school and college. And so I from when I was 14 or 15, I worked in a factory. And my dad had that tradition. My grandfather had that. So it was obvious that I was going to go into manufacturing.
Yeah. So when you were that young, what did you like manufacturing, or was it just a job?
Well, like I say, the family had always done it, and it was real. It had substance. You could see the end product.
Yeah.
Good people to work with, salt of the earth people in manufacturing. So it was a great experience. I was a 14, 15-year-old kid working with these 50, 60-year-old people that had been doing this all their life, and were just wonderful people to work with. So it made a lot of sense. Now, eventually, when I went away to college, I started as a chemical engineer, and eventually switched over to mechanical. But manufacturing was always more or less the plan.
Yeah. So you went to MIT for your college, for your engineering college anyway, and you got a BS and then an MS in mechanical engineering, correct?
Correct.
Yep. Yeah. So, MIT, prestigious school. And what did you really enjoy about school?
Co-eds.
There you go.
It was I had a good high school background, so MIT was hard, but it wasn't, impossibly hard. And I really liked thermodynamics of the mechanical engineering subject. I was good at everything, sort of A more or less in mechanical, but in thermodynamics, for some reason, it just all clicked, and I was A plus. And I was just knocking them out, and heat transfer, but really thermodynamics. So I lived in a fraternity.
Yeah.
Moved in before freshman year started, and stayed there through graduate school. So I lived 5 years. Never lived in a dorm one day.
Okay.
And for a bookworm, coming in from, not having been especially socialized, so to speak, to be at the fraternity and the parties and the other people. It was a very good background. It helped to make me much better at working with people and getting things done.
Yeah. That's cool. I'd have to say thermodynamics was not one of my favorite subjects in college. I've got a mechanical engineering degree as well. I think mine was really when I got into internal combustion engines and that kind of stuff. And actually one of the most interesting classes I took was atomic physics, which I don't know why, but it really clicked with me. So, it's nice to talk to another engineer that actually knows what you're talking about when you talk about a thermodynamics class, because it is a little different track in college, that's for sure, to do engineering. But
and that's one of the problems. Most American kids believe they're not good at math, they're not good at science, and as a result, I think something like 3% or 6% of U.S. degrees are in engineering.
Yeah.
And in China, 30% are in engineering.
Yeah.
And so you got people over there willing to work for a lot less, willing to work really hard because they're still hungry, and with a team 10 times as big as our team.
Yeah.
That's pretty tough competition.
Yeah, you're right. And I think you make a good point because, I think back to my kids, and my kids they could have done engineering school, but they chose not to because they would say the very same words that came out of your mouth. They didn't think they were good enough at math and science, or they didn't like math and science. But I tell you, I think the people that do foray into it and do it, they will find a very, very rewarding career ahead of them if they take just seize the opportunity. And it's not easy. I mean, you and I both know that it takes work to get through engineering school, but the opportunities that it provides are second to none, really.
It took work to study Latin.
Yeah, you're right. That's it too. That's it.
And the career opportunities are a lot better in engineering.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's for sure. Well, I want to pause for a second. Gail, hi, how are you doing today? Great seeing you here. And Gail Robertson's a good supporter out of Canada. Gail is part of the Canadian Molding Association, and she does a lot of work with injection mold manufacturers in Canada. So that's interesting. That's where I started out in manufacturers. In manufacturing is in molding, and I stayed in that for a number of years, and I really enjoyed that.
For whatever it's worth, I was I think 1998 SPE Mold Designer of the Year.
Really?
Yeah, even though I never designed a mold, but they didn't have anybody that was really appropriate, and they were impressed by the work I'd done on skilled workforce recruitment. And so I said, "Hey, let's give it to Harry."
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, because you've done a lot of work in the skilled workforce improvement, and talk a little bit about why you kind of keyed in on that and started helping people with that.
Yeah. It ties eventually into the reshoring concept, in that the Germans, for example, have incomes about the same as ours, maybe even a little higher. Yeah. And yet they have a trade surplus equal to 5% of their GDP, while we have a trade deficit equal to 3% of our GDP. So that difference of 8% for us would be $1.7 trillion a year, which would employ about 9 million manufacturing workers if we were as manufacturing intense as Germany is. And I ascribe a lot of that difference. Many experts would ascribe a lot of that difference to the apprenticeship system.
Yeah.
Switzerland and Germany very similar. I know Switzerland better, but about 60% of the high school kids at the age of 16 go into an apprenticeship. They stay there. It's typically a 4-year apprenticeship. When they get great academic training while they're in it, they get incredible hands-on training, a combination of the two. I've taken tours to 4 different tours of U.S. apprentices and shop owners to Switzerland to see the Swiss system. And these kids that you'd meet are, if you met them, you'd say, wow, these are really sharp college kids. And they can talk about anything you want to talk about. And they could do it typically in English, French, and German.
Yeah.
And they're on their way to becoming great tool makers or welders or precision machinists or automation builders or something like that. So and because they come into the company at the age of 16, they get the training. Most of them stay on in the company. They know the product, they know the process, they know the other employees, they know the customers. They work their way up within the company. Some go on to get a university degree, engineering, management, so on. And typically the senior management of these, what they call the Mittelstand, the mom and pop kind of 20 to 500 people companies, typically the senior management started as apprentices.
Wow.
Whereas in the U.S., as you get towards the higher side of that, you'd expect them to be MBAs or something as an accountant who brought into the company, or something. These are people who work that we have really, and as a result, they're better throughout their career on average than our people. I took one of these apprentice tours to one of the biggest Swiss machine tool makers, not my company, different company, and the head of applications engineering development, for the world, he said, when we develop this, say, a 5-axis machine, when we develop the process for Germany or Switzerland, we do it in one setup on one machine and get it done. But when we're doing it for the U.S., because on average, the programmers and the operators are not as skilled, we break it down into 2 setups. So now the chances for error, the chances for inaccuracy, the productivity, because you don't put it on once and let it run sort of forever. You got to take it off and put it somewhere else. So the U.S. just is not competitive overall. So I'm sure our best people are as good as their best people, but our average isn't as good as their average. And yet we've got to compete with them on the world market. I was at a good sized, maybe 150 person U.S., very high precision, something like Swiss turning. And I said, whom do you have problems competing with? He said, the Germans. They can make the stuff as good or better than we can, and they can sell it for 10 or 15% less than we can sell it for. And yet they're buying roughly the same equipment.
Yeah.
So to me, the difference is the skilled workforce that are, programming and running the machines. So I've always put a high priority on for the country to get those people, but at the same time, and obviously for the company, because if the companies all had those people, the country would succeed. But for the worker, I'm very unhappy that our country does a horrible job of telling them about the opportunity. So as an example, back about 8 years ago, the Department of Labor called me to Washington, D.C. to tell them how to get the workforce ready for the flood of work that was coming back from offshore. And so we're in the Secretary of Labor's conference room, Harry and 6 or 7 of them. And they said, okay, what do you have? And I said, okay. And I pulled up one of their websites. And I said, I thought you guys were responsible for us to have the workforce we needed. And specifically, you were responsible for the National Apprenticeship Program. They said, yeah. I said, well, here's this website. And it says, education pays. And it's a typical bar chart that shows income going up with number of degrees. No high school, associate, And I said, it's interesting. I look at that chart, and nowhere on there do I see the income of people who've passed an apprenticeship. So guidance counselors, economists, mayors, parents all over the country, they're trying to decide what Johnny and Jill should do. And then they're told that the only correlation is with number of degrees. And they never are told that an apprenticeship or a good stack of credentials actually produces on average an income just as good as the bachelor's degree does. And if the government isn't telling them, how do you expect them to find out? Because the guidance counselors aren't going to invent this out of nowhere. Right? So and they folded and they changed that website. They added some words about apprenticeship. But I was going on today, and I still find lots of charts on DOL and Department of Education say the same thing. And so I'm in the process of emailing Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor and offering my help to audit their websites and help them get it right.
Well, I mean, this is something, and we're gonna back up to just a minute before when we finish this conversation, because I want people to understand your experience too and where you're coming from when you talk about skilled workforce. But this is something that I see, I feel in our country we've missed, is that, going to college doesn't necessarily mean that this is the best opportunity for everyone, right? And that's kind of what it's been played off as. And then the people that don't go to college, we've lost that apprenticeship. It just seems like we've lost it. We've lost the fact that, listen, you can work, and we're talking about manufacturing today, or you can go and go into an apprenticeship and be a plumber or an electrician, or these are good jobs. These are good career decisions for somebody. Whereas, and I know might be a good career decision for some people, but working at Domino's Pizza and working in a manufacturing facility as an apprentice and being able then to move on, I would bet that they're going to be happier being the apprentice and working in the manufacturing facility for a long time.
Certainly 10 years later, and certainly if they take the career opportunities they have. One piece of data that the guidance counselors, I'm sure, never give them. It turns out guidance counselors' main job is to get the kids into the best college they can get into, and because the high school is measured by the colleges that the students go to. And so one piece of data that they never give out is that at any point in time, about 35% of all people who have a bachelor's degree are in a job that does not require a bachelor's degree.
Yes.
They're at Starbucks, they're at, doing something like that. And some of them have gone back and become plumbers and tool makers so they can make an income so they can pay off their college debt.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And yet, I mean, if they had their nose rubbed in that, 30% of you, if you go on to college, are going to be in jobs that don't require a college degree. So instead of picking up $100,000 in debt and 4 years not making any money, why don't you start off with an apprenticeship? I did a study about 8 years ago, and I compared an English major to a tool maker, and said, and I looked at the income and cash flow starting at the age of 18, and the tool maker apprentice starts making money, and the English major pays money. Okay, and then I took half of the higher income that the tool maker had and paid taxes with it, and the other half invested at 7% per year. And at the age of 49, the tool maker had $1 million more net worth than the English major.
Yeah.
Because income was always higher and there wasn't that negative cash flow at the beginning.
Yeah.
You think the guidance counselors are passing that out? No.
No. And I, as you look at it too, and when you think about it, they are being measured by how flashy the colleges that their kids go to. That's for sure. Well, we've got a couple real quick. We got some comments here from Kenneth. Hello, Kenneth. Thanks for getting in here. And he says, going to college doesn't guarantee you a job either. That is something that's bothered me a lot with my kids are in their 20s and out of college or nearly out of college. And, a lot of their friends have gone to college for degrees that you really wonder what they're going to use that for. And often they fall into that category that you said. They're working in a job that doesn't require a college degree, and it is just negative cash flow at the beginning. So
I got this great cartoon that I often use in my presentations, and it's a kitchen in a restaurant, and this young kid, maybe 25, cigarette, long hair, we're doing the dishes, and the four or five other guys cleaning the floor, doing whatever, all of them looking sort of, and one of them says to the kid, stop complaining, all of us have PhDs in English literature.
Yeah. Well, it's sad but true. I mean, even years ago, my one of my brothers did an MBA at Notre Dame, and he had gotten his undergraduate at a different school, a much smaller school, and he would lamented over the people that would pay the price to go to Notre Dame and get an English degree, or a degree that was you knew you were going to go out and not really get a high paying job with it. So it is something I definitely need to talk about. And I sure appreciate you sharing that information with us on the skill of manufacturing. But let's back up just for a moment, because we're sitting here talking about, we kind of got off on the skill of manufacturing, but you've got a pretty solid viewpoint to be talking about these things, because you graduated from MIT in mechanical engineering, and then you started in the G manufacturing management program, And then, tell us about your career. Cause I mean, I've got a few of them written down here, but kind of tell us about your career, because I think it'd be helpful for people to understand that, because your experience gives you real world background to talk about these subjects.
It's been a while. I hope I can remember all of it. So it started in the GE manufacturing management program at large steam turbine generator in Schenectady, sort of the beginning of GE, you might say. And then nuclear power out in San Jose. Yeah. And only stayed a year and a half and left and came back and worked at MIT industrial liaison office, exchanging technology, economics, science, what have you, with big companies around the world. It was great, formative kind of thing. Left that and became technical director and then marketing director for Adhesimatic, molding machine, big automated molding equipment for foundries. Went from, and I hope I get this right in order, went from there to what was then called Acme Cleveland, which owned National Acme and Cleveland Twistrel, two great U.S. industrial companies, both of which Cleveland is a brand still, but not a factory, not a big factory anymore. And National Acme just completely gone. And left there, became president of Roto Finish, vibratory finishing machinery, nice little company, good product. And then my peak of my career, Charmy, EDM machine. At that time, EDM and eventually also high-speed milling and laser and so on. But it was a wonderful job. When I came, the company was in total disarray when I came in, and probably couldn't find anybody else to take it. I don't know. And we were like number 7 or 8 in the North American industry. And within about 6 years, we were number 1. And to take it from way down here to way up now. New products from corporate, wonderful team, great people, but what a wonderful collection of employees, of distributors, of customers. The thing I think I did best, I traveled probably a third of the time going to see customers, and what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What can we do differently? Etc. Then I come back and work with our team and figure out how, and eventually we identified all the things we should be doing, answering the phone, having the spare parts available, having service engineers available to go out and fix, training methods, et cetera. And then we started to measure all those things and post them. Each department had metrics, KPIs. And one of my best days, one of our competitors, we picked up their distributor in Michigan, and Bob Palmer, and he came in, and I said, Bob, let me give you the tour. And he said, because I always took customers, prospects around for the tour, and he said, Harry, I've heard all about the tour. He said, what do you mean? Well, when we were selling against you, the prospective customers told me how wonderful the tour was and how Charmy does everything right, and we had nothing to answer. And I'm glad to be on your side now. I said, well, that feels good.
That does. That's so great. That's so great. Well, I mean, what you did at Charmy is really good, basic business practice. It's listen to your customers, let them tell you what you really need to change, and then make sure you're doing it right.
So a lot of the other machine tool company presidents would go to the AMT meetings. Wonderful thing to do, great association, et cetera. And I went to the NTMA meetings, the National Tooling and Machining Association meetings, where all my customers were. So I'd be there with 100 of these shop owners and no other machine tool salesman anywhere in sight, So one time I'm talking to a new member, and another guy, Dwayne Schreiber, comes over, and Dwayne says to Bill, don't let Harry take you to dinner. And Bill says, hey, Harry and Joe are going to take me out and Sue out to dinner. Well, he's a nice enough guy. He's going to pay. What's wrong? And Dwayne said, well, about 3 years ago, Harry took Shirley and me to dinner. And since then, I bought $3 million worth of his machines.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is that. I mean, it's the way it's building the relationships and having a good product. I mean, that's what it is. Doing the right things and building relationships is how you build businesses.
Yeah, and I tell people, you know me, if my team isn't performing, if you can't get the service, you can't get the spare part, you can't get something, try the system, but eventually call me.
Yeah.
And so they knew the president, and at these other companies, they typically didn't know the president, so they had a higher feeling of confidence. Now, sometimes did I have to push Bill in front of Jim, because I had the relationship with Bill, and was that fair to Jim? No, I don't know, but overall it worked.
Yeah. No doubt. So your background in running and being in and running these different businesses, you got to see, I mean, you think about from turbines to nuclear energy to, being a knowledge-based thing in MIT, and then into the manufacturing companies manufacturing these end products, and sometimes very technical end products. You've seen the importance of a skilled workforce and good apprenticeship or training programs for the employees, and how that really can affect a business. So that's why I wanted to cover it. So as we're talking about the skilled workforce and how that plays into our current state in the United States of manufacturing, you come from a meeting of a position of knowing and living it.
So 50 years of living it.
Yeah. But I bet there's not too many of those years that you would say, I could leave that.
No, actually, there were maybe 2 years or 3 years out of 50 that I was not delighted.
Yeah,
all the rest of the years, I said, "Wow, this is as good as it gets." This is wonderful.
Good. That's awesome. That's awesome. So you've got this career, you got this stellar career going on, and you're getting near the end, and you're like, well, what am I going to do? So you founded the Reshoring Initiative. What epitome did you have that you were going to try to take this, that made you just decide, I am going to take this on?
Was that actually an epiphany?
Yeah, epiphany. Well, I'm saying the wrong words because I'm going for it, but epiphany. Yeah. What just?
Well, I mentioned Singer, and I drove past the old Singer plant in Elizabeth, which again was a colossus in its day, and nothing is made there anymore. As far as I can tell, nothing is made of Singer anywhere in the country. Everything imported, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
And during my career, selling machine tools, selling foundry equipment, company after company, industry after industry that I had targeted to sell to, shoe machinery makers, textile machinery makers, the machine tool companies, foundry equipment companies, competitors disappeared. They just get wiped out. The dollar would go up like in 1985, and another third of the industry would disappear because you couldn't possibly compete with Japan and Germany because your costs were just so high because of the dollar having gone up so much. And so I said, this is not acceptable, and somebody has to do something about that. And so I was retiring from Charmy, George Fisher, and I felt I was the right guy to do it. I knew imports and exports. I knew manufacturing, economics, commerce. I'd written and presented a lot, so I had contacts throughout the industry and in the media. Yeah. And I said, well, and I had enough money that I didn't have to go out and get another job. So I said, let's do something good for the country.
Yeah. So it kind of blows me away, because where do you start? Where do you start with something like this? I mean,
initially, the first thing I did was to write the TCO estimator, so total cost of ownership estimator, which is probably what we're best known for. And think of it as a spreadsheet, and a company that is trying to decide, should I offshore, should I reshore? Should I offshore, source domestically? You start with the FOB or ex-works price, so the factory price in the US and the other source, and then it helps you add in duty, freight, packaging, carrying cost of inventory, risk of stocking out, intellectual property risk, 29 different things like that. And when you get done with that, when you start out, you say, China 20-30% lower than the US, of course, China. But when you've added all this stuff in, it's either the US wins, or maybe it gets down from 30% difference maybe to a 5% difference. And then you say, if we put some new equipment in, we did a little lean, we did a little training, we got the workforce really engaged, we can knock 5% out of the cost. Whereas if you said, can we knock 30% out of material burden and labor? Well, unless you're horrible to start with, it's not going to happen. Okay, so it either when you do this TCO, and it gets you down to where it's feasible. And so show you the power of that, I took the first 180 cases of China versus the US, where the user had done the calculation with the spreadsheet. And of the 180 cases, 8% of the time, the US had the lowest price, but 32% we had the lowest total cost. And if there happened to be a Trump 15% tariff, 46% of the time the US won. So just by doing the math correctly and recognizing everything instead of just looking at the ex-works price, you go from 8% to maybe 46%. And so we say that for most companies, most products, something like 20 or 30% of what they import, they would bring back if they did the math correctly. And here's the TCO estimator on our website, free. You sign up, you sign in, you use it. There's examples, there's explanations, there's formulas, so you can see the formulas. So we're not making it up somehow behind the curtain. And people do it, and not all of them, but some of them decide to bring their work back.
Well, I think what you're I'm glad we got into this, because obviously I've seen this before, and looking at your TCO as total cost of ownership estimator for manufacturers, I think most manufacturers don't really even consider the cost of that extra inventory and the risks and the other things into it. They're just looking at cost $5, cost $4, $3, whatever, and that's how they make the decision.
Survey says that's what they do. That about 60% of them look basically just at the price.
Yeah.
And now, is there a trend towards TCO? I sure hope so. I've been doing this for 10 years.
Yeah.
so it's Thomas Net just did a survey and asked companies, how do you decide where to source? And they said TCO. That was the biggest, not huge, but the first number one choice. I felt pretty good. But there's still, I had a big aerospace company, and this is maybe 7-8 years ago. And I was there to present at a ISM meeting, something like that. And I'm sitting next to the supply chain manager of a big aerospace company. And I said, Bill, how do you decide? He said, price. I said, yeah, you can't. He said, you're a big company. This is multi-billion. And he said, well, here's this housing. And he goes like this. I'm thinking 500 pounds. And he said, we cast it here. We air freight it to China to be machined. We air freight it back here to be plated. We air freight it back to China to be machined again, back here to assemble it into the end product.
Yeah.
And when we make the decision to do this instead of doing it all here, we only look at the price for the machining and the component and whatever. And we do not include the air freight. We do not include the carrying cost of inventory or the paperwork or the delay or anything else in making the decision.
Really?
Yeah. So I said, and this is one of the 10 or 20 biggest companies in the country.
That's amazing.
So if they're that bad, at least that bad, then you have to assume there's thousands of others that are basically doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it is, I've been involved in it before where we've had, making the decision onshore, offshore, how you're going to do it. And I've been fortunate enough in most of those situations, we did look at the total cost of ownership. And when you start to do that, it is like you said, you look at it and it's a 30% cost differential or whatever, offshoring it. But when you start to look at the inventory costs and being able to react to demand changes or things like that, and how much you have to commit to if you're starting out with a new product line or something like that, it really, that cost gap shrinks pretty fast.
Yeah. So as my favorite example, there's a EMS company to make printed circuit boards, Moser Corp, outside Chicago. And they came to me about 5 years ago, the VP sales. He said, Harry, we're about to lose a big order. Can you help us? I said, okay, what is it? He said, well, Chinese competitor offering a lower price. And so I helped Tony do the TCO calculation. And he took it to the customer, showed the customer that even though Maury's price was higher, its TCO was lower. And I got a letter from Tony saying that was the key to winning a $60 million order.
Yeah.
So for all the listeners out there, if you're fighting against imports for some kind of business or trying to make the decision on your own part for your own company, you use the TCO estimator, contact me, ask for help. My mission is to bring 5 million manufacturing jobs back. We count that we've brought back that 5 million have come back, not all because of us, but 5 million have come, or 1 million have come back out of the 5 million. I need another 4. So it's time for the phone to start ringing.
Yeah.
Let me help you.
Well, that's like, you bring up a great point though, for suppliers. If you're supplying something to somebody and you're in competition with an offshore manufacturer for those components or those products, that is a way for you to really differentiate yourself from the offshore, but other competitors, even in the United States, if you came in and were intelligently talked about the total cost of ownership.
Yeah, we find a lot of recently, the last year or two, a lot of contract manufacturers and other small OEMs are starting to put on their website something like thinking of reshoring, tired of long deliveries and quality issues, tired of paying in advance of shipment, etc.
Yeah.
Here's what our company is doing to help you, and often they'll link them to our website to see things. But increasingly, companies are being aggressively going forward to make the reshoring pitch to their customers.
Yeah.
Another thing we offer, if the company is not having a lot of such opportunities, but knows that there's a lot being imported. So if there's if a company makes widgets, whatever this is, it could be contract manufacturer, could be their own pump or motor or something. Yeah? We have the import substitution program, and reshoring is substituting domestic for imports. And so the company fills out a form, identifies the product that they're really good at making, and then we train them on using TCO as a sales tool, and we tell them who the biggest importers are of the product they're good at making, what tonnage they're bringing in, some idea of what they're paying for it, whom they're buying it from offshore. And then the widget company uses the TCO argument to go to that importer to convince them to buy from the widget company instead. Okay. So in effect, we give them the leads and the tool to go out and get the business.
Yeah, because your interests are aligned. You're trying to get more work in manufacturing in the United States, and they want more work for their businesses. And working together, it's a smart thing to do,
and good for the country at the same time.
And good for the country,
And another thing, going back to the skilled workforce, just to tie that back in again, if you ask kids and guidance counselors, why shouldn't Bill go become a toolmaker or welder? Well, industry, we had the factory in town and it got shut down and everybody was unemployed and opioids. And, it's been an up and down industry. It hasn't been something stable. So the single best way to overcome that argument is in a given community or state to document all the cases of reshoring, to let the guidance counselor and the parents and the kids see Huh, that's interesting. Work's coming back from China. 46% of the reshoring is from China. So work isn't going to China anymore. It's coming back from China. Yes, Susie, you want to become a welder? Probably that's really a good idea now. Why don't you become a welder?
Yeah. And it is happening more and more, because as the popularity of this ramped up, the cost of wages and cost of manufacturing has gone up around the world. And
especially China.
Especially China.
Especially China. China for about 20 years, China averaged 10 to 15% annual wage increases, driven significantly by the fact that they had the one-child policy, which cut that cohort of people who I think 40 years old and less, which is your solid, the center of your working group, cut it in half. Instead of having 2 kids or 3 kids, they had 1 kid. And so their workforce is dropping at 3.4 million per year, and the demand for labor has been going up at 6 or 7% per year. So the price of labor goes up, and hey, that's great for them. They're middle class now, and it's good for us because now they're not so damn competitive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really noticeable now in the past projects. I mean, it's been a number of years now since I've been doing anything with offshore manufacturing, but even 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I think it was, it was, the gap was narrowing. I mean, it really has to be a special kind of product for it to, when you look at total cost of ownership, to make sense.
The counterbalancing thing, however, is that U.S. productivity, manufacturing productivity, has increased an average of 1% per year for the last 12 years.
Wow.
Okay. Chinese productivity has increased an average of 6 or 7% per year over that time period.
Wow.
So maybe half of that wage increase is eaten up by the productivity increase. So what you see over there, with the trillions of dollars we've spent buying stuff from there, they've built these new factories with the newest equipment and the most robots, and because they see shortages of their workforce, they're automating like hell. And our factories too often are 50 years old, and you still see Bridgeports and whatever in them, and not enough robots and not enough loading, automatic loading and so on. So whereas the Germans, they've continued to invest. So I always say we need to be trained and do investment like the Germans, and work as hard and aggressively as the Chinese. and if we do that, we're going to be way back on top.
Yeah. Well, it's mesmerizing almost listen to you, because you know this information so well. And I know the people that are listening, we've got a bunch more comments that I haven't been put on the screen that are great comments. And thanks, Gail and Kenneth, and others that are commenting. Because, this is really important stuff for manufacturers. This is important stuff for people that are looking to get into the job market. I mean, because there are opportunities in manufacturing. There are going to continue to be opportunities in manufacturing. And I think as long as we have people who are thinking about it globally and really understanding what the long-term goals and plans should be for business to be successful, you really have to look at this business differently, and not as we talked about earlier, just how much is it costing, and on a piece price basis, like the example you gave of the aerospace part moving around, but really look at this total cost of ownership, and then figure out how can we get better? Because if we do that productivity increase, that little bit of difference here or there, we can make it as competitive as anywhere.
One other thing to think about is risk. And there's the Suez Canal risk, there's the COVID risk, things that mess you up for a couple of months and so on. But I've got a friend over there, a top sinologist, so a China expert, Dr. Eamon McKinney. He's written a bunch of stuff. Anybody can find him. And for about the last 6 months to a year, he's been convinced that the Chinese are going to decouple from the U.S. That because they're so pissed off because of Trump, because of Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, trade war, all this stuff, everything that they think that we've done to persecute them, to South China Sea and so on, and that they are going to at some point in time announce that China will not ship anything to the U.S. They will completely cut us off, sever all the contracts, ship to anybody else as long as somebody else doesn't cross ship to the U.S. And can you imagine us now with the 400 billion or whatever it is that we're buying from China a year, and in many cases they're the only source of the product in the world that we can get it from, and us like carbide and rare earth minerals and medical stuff. And if they just came out and said, "You're done. We're never going to ship you anything again. You're on your own. Suck it up," we'd be devastated. Now, if that had happened 15 years ago, when they needed us to develop their economy, they needed our trillions of dollars of consumer expenditures, it would have just devastated them. But now we've allowed our manufacturing to hollow out so much, and we're so specifically dependent on them. So I think that what's the probability? I don't know if it's 1% or it's 5% or it's 10%, but if it's measurable, anything like 1, 5, 10%, then companies should look at that and say we'd be out of business, and our country would be devastated. In our own interest and in our national obligation, patriotism to the country. It's at least worth doing the math and seeing if we could bring the work back now and be more profitable by doing so.
Well, and you make a great point, because look at what we're living with today. I mean, today. Now, I don't mean today in last month. Just look at today. I've got friends of mine that are running factories. One of them, they do truck upfitting. They build for just about every truck that you see pushing snow or doing something for a government. They've probably had something to do with it, and they're getting trucks delivered that have no window controls, wiring harnesses not on. Mm-hmm. Well, and this is a lot of this is happening because of supply chain disruption that happened from COVID. Now, that's just COVID. This is a different thing, and it's reacting and all those kind of things. But when you look at that, a lot of that is due to the offshore interruptions. But when you look at that and you just think of these examples, and we saw how I don't know, weak isn't the right word, but how dependent our medical products were on the supply chain coming from China, and we've leaned out these supply because some people know the overall cost. We've leaned out the supply chain so much, and then had it coming from offshore, that lean. When that was interrupted for not very long, we were left to truly scramble to try to figure out how to cover a short-term kind of problem like that. I can't even fathom what would happen if the Chinese imports stopped for 3 months.
Penicillin.
Oh yeah,
masks and gowns and gloves and rare earth mineral. Like I have this theory, and it could be entirely wrong, but I have this theory that 15, 20 years ago, China and Russia got together, and the Russians continued to build up their military, and the Chinese task was to soften the U.S. economically, to undermine our manufacturing, so we could not maintain our military capabilities, and so that our budget deficit would boom, hugely increase, which means we wouldn't have the money to pay for the military, and so you'd have an economically and militarily weakened U.S. faced by China and Russia. Did they ever agree to that or not? I don't know, but it sure seems similar to what you actually see having happened. Because one interesting thing, the Chinese trade surplus with the U.S. is approximately equal to their trade surplus with the world. So all the rest of the world, they're roughly in balance in aggregate. And in the U.S., they have this huge trade surplus. So you look at that and say, looks to me like they're targeting the U.S. and they're preferentially helping their countries ship to the U.S. More so than to Germany or Italy or anywhere else in the world. So,
you don't know, but it is, and reshoring these jobs to the U.S. or even if you're not going to fully reshore jobs, at least have part of your supply chain dependent, getting product from a local resource or a resource within the United States, because then you're not down for good and you're not dead in the water.
You get a chance to come back.
Yeah. You got a chance to do that.
So some people are talking about China plus one strategies. You continue to get most of it from China, get some from India, Turkey, somewhere. Hey, okay, but what are the costs of having two sets of tooling, keeping them consistent, keeping the quality, keeping everything working, in comparison to maybe a higher labor cost here, but having one source 5 miles from your assembly plant, and you do all that math and you put it all together. In many of the cases, the U.S. is going to turn out to be the right choice.
Yeah.
But when I've got my neighbor up here in Maine is Jim Womack, the lean guru.
Yeah.
Okay, and he talks about lean shoring. He says when you bring it back, don't put it in the same old factory with the same old equipment, with the same people and the same bad habits. Put it with new equipment, preferably a new factory. Train the people, get the lean flow right, so you're doing it, as efficiently as you can.
Yeah.
And really train the people. And when you do that, you're going to find that an awful lot of what you bring back can be done economically here. So you can't just do it the same old way. You have to do it better. Because they're doing it better over there all the time, so we have to do it better.
Yeah, that's for sure, and that's a great point. I think we can't continue to do things the way that we have, and obviously expect to get better results. We have to keep innovating and doing what we need to do to be better at it, and this means where we source, how we do things, and everything, to look at that total cost of ownership and get that to be competitive with the rest of the world.
We work a lot with the MEPs, Manufacturing Extension Partnerships.
Yep.
There's one in every state, and some of them offer our programs like the import substitution program to their constituent client companies in the state. So if you like what I described, this import substitution program, either contact me or ask your local MEP if they'd be willing to get involved.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool, because the MEPs, I think the MEPs are some of the best kept secrets in the United States, because most people don't even know about them, and they could use a lot of their resources if they just knew they were there. So that's good that you guys are working with. So before I forget, what is your website address for the Reshoring Initiative, so people can make sure to do that and get that?
www.reshorenow.org.
Okay. Reshorenow.org.
Reshorenow.org. You look up Reshoring Initiative, you'll find us anyway.
Okay.
But reshorenow.org. And if I can be of help, it's harry.moser@reshorenow.org.
Okay.
So just email me and say, Harry, I heard you with Damon. You're crazy. Yeah. Oh, okay. Or Harry, I've got an opportunity. I did reshore. I want to tell you about our success, and I'll make you famous. Or we have an opportunity to reshore. We need your help.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great point. So if someone's listening and they want to look at reshoring, need help reshoring, you're a contract manufacturer, you're trying to get some business back, or you're competing against an offshore resource, the Reshoring Initiative is a great place to start, and Harry can help you there. And again, it's reshorenow.org. And before we get off, what are some of the key things that you think are going to hit us as manufacturers in the United States in the next few years?
You want the good things or the bad things?
Let's start with the bad things, because I know the good things are going to be good.
At the risk of being political, I'm not in favor of a higher corporate income tax rate, because that reduces the after-tax return on investment of having a factory in the U.S. I think that's a negative. The president is pushing. He keeps saying we need millions more good union jobs in the United States, and there are a few unions that have been very proactive and lean with their companies. Some have been great, but the overall history is not consistent with increasing competitiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And so a mandate for more unions is not consistent with bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. In my opinion, I'd love to have the unions prove me wrong, but I've worked with two or three of them in the past. I'm happy to work with them again to help them convince their companies to reshore and bring the work back so they'll have more jobs. So happy to work with them. Minimum wage, no, everybody's paying above the minimum wage now anyway, so it's almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid if that happens, someone's going to want to raise it to $25 an hour, and there's some point there where it does raise our costs too much, and it used to be you had to go, if you wanted to get ahead, you had to go into an apprenticeship or you had to go into manufacturing instead of Starbucks. But if you can make $25 at Starbucks, then why would you bother? Treasurer Yellen keeps talking about wanting a strong dollar. And one of the biggest problems we've had in the past has been that the dollar is consistently overvalued by 20 or 30%. Which is what is the driving factor in our trade deficit. So I think I'd more happily hear her say, I want a dollar that's stable at a lower level. But she's afraid to say that because the currency markets and so on. But it's clearly the right thing to do if you want to bring the jobs back. Because companies, if the companies see 30 and 40% price differences, they're not going to listen to me. They're going to listen to the accountant, and they're going to go and buy it cheap. And so it makes my job and Damon's job harder by keeping the dollar where it is. So those are the bad things. Some of the good things, I like the emphasis on the supply chain, the willingness to tax people for offshoring and reward them for reshoring. One concern I have, though, like a lot of the emphasis recently has been on, for example, chips. And there's talks of tens of billions of dollars invested in the chip factory. I think you have to do it because if you fall too far behind in that, your history. You don't have a chance. But right now, we're at risk of being dependent on Taiwan and China to get our chips. And if we don't get the dollar down and bring back the production of cell phones and computers and servers and infotainment systems on cars and all this kind of stuff like you were talking about. If we don't bring that back here, and we build 5 or 6 new chip foundries, and they have all this extra output that's coming out, then we're going to have to sell them to China to use to make those products that we then buy back. So instead of being dependent on China for chips, we're going to be dependent on China for a market for our chips. And therefore, I think doing the chip foundries is the right thing to do. But at the same time, we should get the dollar down so that the production of the end product comes back. So there'll be a market here for the chips that we make.
Well, and it is to help remove some of the risk in our supply chains. I mean, when you think about the risk that induces, it's pretty scary, actually.
Combination of China and Taiwan together.
Yeah,
because China's committed to taking back Taiwan, and if they take it back, then I don't know, whatever it is, 60-70% of the chips are being made in China.
Yeah. All right. Well, I tell you what, Harry, this has been such a great conversation with you because it is one of these things where I'm looking at it, we're about at an hour now, and we probably should wind it up. But sometime I'd like to come back and talk about some of these things in specific. But I just want to let everyone know today's guest, we got Harry Moser from the Reshoring Initiative, reshorenow.org, and it's harry.moser@reshorenow.org if you want to talk about reshoring, total cost of ownership, and other things like that. Thank you so much, Harry. I don't know how else to say. It's such a pleasure to see you. We've been on a couple of shows like this, and I enjoy it every time because you are a wealth of knowledge around this. You understand this at least a national and more of a global level than just about anybody that I talk to. And it's refreshing to be talking to you right now. So thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, David. And thanks to everybody who's out there.
You bet. We'll be back again on Thursday with another guest on the Faces of Business. But thanks so much today to Harry. And remember, once again, I'm going to say it again, the Reshoring Initiative, reshorenow.org, or harry.moser@reshorenow.org, and you can get some questions answered about how you can reshore some of your manufacturing jobs in the United States. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.